In this video, we're going to brew a batch of mead or honey wine, and we're going to bottle a batch that's been in the fermenter for over a year. Also, down in the description, I put a full list of equipment and supplies needed with Amazon links and the recipe and brewing instructions. Hail to you and welcome to the Northwoods Kindred. I'm your Gothi, Bodvar, and on this channel we discuss everything Asatru Kindred related. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see how we do it in the Northwoods Kindred.
Ah, we like to drink in the Northwoods.
We like it to drink. So before we get into the brew class, we're all about giving you value here. So we've come up with our own line of swag. So if you want to help support this channel, we put links below. You can get this Do You Even Bloat Bro? We also have Do You Even Summel Sis? And we have these beautiful ladies tees. Northwoods Kindred, our logo, coffee cups, and a whole lot of other cool stuff. Just follow the link, pick out whatever swag you want, and the proceeds from that go directly to support this kind of content on this channel. We're gonna start off with our equipment, and I have piles of extra equipment. It kind of adds up over the years, but I'm gonna put a list down below in the description to my Amazon store. I don't have it yet, but I'll build it. I'm gonna build a little Amazon section that's just for brewing, and I'll put some basic brewing supplies and then some more advanced brewing supplies. You can pick and choose off of that list and get what you need to absolutely get started. I'll also include down in the description a little quick list of the equipment you need and a quick list with the recipe on it for brewing. So let's get started. So just kind of the quickies that you may already have is a big long spoon, which I don't have out here, but a big spoon, and or at least one that can reach the bottom of this pot. So if you have any kind of a baking spoon or whatever, you probably do okay with something like this. You don't have to buy a big long one. That'll probably do the job. And then we have this canning pot that's 3.5 gallons, I believe, and we need the pot to hold 3 gallons easy. So if it holds 3 gallons easy, you're in good shape to do a 5-gallon batch. If you're brewing a smaller batch, like 2.5 gallons or 1 gallon, then almost any size pot will work. Something you will have to buy, either you can get it from Brew Store or on Amazon, is an acid blend of some sort. Some recipes will use something called an acid blend, and it's a different blend of different types of acids. Some call for citric acid, some call for malic acid, some call for tartaric acid. Another thing is wine tannin or grape tannin. Now this is a clarifying agent. You put it in at the beginning, but it helps those solids, the stuff that's in there, settle to the bottom better. And the last thing is going to be your yeast. You can buy liquid yeasts, you can buy all kinds of different types of yeast. I prefer the Red Star champagne yeast, Pasteur champagne yeast. I've always got really good results from it. You can buy it pretty cheap. It lasts forever if you keep it in the freezer. It's got an expiration date, but I've never had one actually expire if I keep them in the freezer. I just use them when I use them. So Red Star champagne yeast, Pasteur, or I think they changed the name. It's not Pasteur anymore, now it's Premier Blanc. But either way, I'll link to exactly that yeast in my little brew list for you, and then you'll have exactly what I use. Now also, if you're going to be doing fruits or hops or something like that, you're going to want to have one of these mesh bags, because it's sometimes a pain to filter all of that mess out of your brew, but you can leave it in the mesh bag floating in the mix, and then you can deal with that bag of filth later. So after we get all of our equipment together, well, the first thing we have to do is sterilize. Sterilize everything. And you'll notice this is kind of a catch that gets new brewers, is they'll start off brewing, they'll buy some new equipment, they'll start brewing a batch, and it'll be amazing. Progressively, it'll get worse and worse and worse. And then it'll get to the point where they can't even brew a good batch anymore. It all comes down to the sterilization. Sterilize everything, treat it as the absolute most important part of the entire process. Sterilize, sterilize, sterilize. And when in doubt, sterilize again. What I have here is Star Sands. This is a no-rinse sterilizer. It's got instructions. You mix it according to the instructions, and you use that as a sterilizer for everything. Now that everything's sterilized, now we're going to put 2 gallons of water in this pot, and we're going to get it to a boil. Once it starts boiling, we're going to turn it off, because that's the point where we're going to start adding our honey. We don't boil it with our honey in it. Some people do. That's fine. I have done both. I haven't really noticed any kind of a difference. We only boil these first 2 gallons. The second 2 gallons, I don't boil. But if you're brewing off of city water, I would suggest go get bottled water, go down to the grocery store and fill up the 5-gallon jugs of water. maybe use that or boil it if you're not sure of the source. But my water is super clean mountain water. But if there is a concern, then take whatever steps you need to make sure that the water that you're using is pure. Because you don't want anything in it that the city might put in there to kill bacteria. You don't want that water in there killing off your yeast. Now the job of that yeast is it eats the sugar and it poops alcohol. That's essentially what it is. And while it's pooping alcohol, it's farting CO2. So you'll get a lot of bubbles and stuff in the brew, and the faster your bubbles are going, the more your yeast is duplicating and doing its job. So that's the simplest explanation for it. It converts those sugars to alcohol and carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide is released, the alcohol is retained. So after we boil the water, we add our honey to it, whichever brand of honey we decided on. We dissolve it thoroughly in the hot water without boiling it again. Now that you have your honey dissolved, you're going to want to add your acid blend to this, what amounts to about 2.5 to 3 gallon batch right now. You're going to add those, you're going to stir those in, let them dissolve and keep stirring for a little while, and then you're going to add your tannin. Like I said, you're going to add that tannin nice and slow, spread it around really thin, and then stir it in completely before you move on to the next step. Now that you got that dissolved really well, this is the point where you're going to add any adjuncts that you may need to boil or you may need to have steep. So if I was adding some kind of spices to the brew, cinnamon or whatnot, I may add it now to let it steep. Also, if I'm going to do a fruit and if I'm doing it in a puree or whatever, I'm going to put that into my mesh bag and I'm going to add that now so it has some time to steep in this hot brew before we transfer it to our primary fermenter. Now, knowing how much water I have in here and knowing how big my fermenter is, I can add the remainder to the fermenter. So, just as an example, if this has 3 gallons in it, because it's got 1 gallon of honey and 2 gallons of water. So I've got 3 gallons here and I'm brewing a 5-gallon batch. I can add 2 gallons directly to my primary fermenter so that when I pour this in there, they'll mix up in the fermenter. I don't have to have a 5-gallon pot in order to do this. Sometimes it's helpful if I can cool this down a little bit more because 3 hot gallons won't cool completely in 2 cold gallons. And it has to get within a certain temperature range for that yeast to start doing its job. It thrives in a certain environment, and I want to kind of give it that environment as best I can. So I can either leave this out overnight, just cover it up the way it is, no other work, or I can put it into some sort of a cooling bath, or you can put like those frozen ice cube, sandwich ice cube things. You can put those in there, let them float around in there and cool off your batch. Don't forget to sterilize them if you're going to put them into your batch. Make sure they get sterilized really good before they go in there, but you can definitely use anything like that, or even just a big gallon Ziploc bag full of ice. Put that in there, sterilize it again, put that in there and make sure that until your batch gets cooled down to about room temperature or whatever, because once you add it to the primary fermenter, you want to kind of keep that somewhere in the 65 to 75 degree range. Also, if you're not brewing in a big 8-gallon conical fermenter, you can use a food grade brewing bucket or one of these glass carboys. I would caution against using the plastic carboys, but glass is always a winner. The difference is you're going to need 2 of either container because partway through the brewing process, you're going to have to use something like this racking cane to transfer the liquid from one container to the next. So depending on the size of the batch you're brewing, in my case, I almost always brew a 5-gallon batch. But if you take my recipe, divide it in half, then you can brew a 2.5-gallon batch. Divide everything by 5, and you'll have a 1-gallon batch. So just do a little math, trick out my recipe how you need to for whatever size batch that you're brewing. Now, one quick thing. This recipe that I'm affording you with the apricots, I made this recipe with peaches many, many years ago, and at All Thing 23 for the Asatru Alliance, I won the Silver Bee, the coveted Silver Bee, as the overall winner of the Mead Brewing competition. With this recipe, with those apricots replaced with peaches. Now, I brew a 5-gallon batch, so once I get everything added to my primary fermenter, usually it's a little high or a little low off that 5 mark, I will add water to make it 5.5 gallons. And the reason I add that extra half gallon is because there's a lot of sediment and testing and other things that are going to happen through the course of the brewing process. And I want to make sure that when I'm done and ready to bottle, that I'm right at or slightly above the 5-gallon mark. And I will lose mead in the process of brewing and maintaining this batch over its life cycle. So we're getting really, really close to the point where we just get to watch it in excitement. But the first thing we have to do is after it's cooled and you've added the proper amount of water and the balance, everything is exactly where you want it, we have to take a hydrometer reading. And you can of course skip this step, but I like to know the alcohol content of my batch. So for example, Chaucer's, of course it's a commercial mead, so it has to say on the back what it is. And this is Chaucer's runs at 10.5% alcohol. This particular batch of alcohol that I brewed is 9 on this batch. This is one that I brewed last year and it sat in the carboy for a year. And I have other batches that are 11 all the way up to 14% alcohol. So the amount of sugar you put in and how long you let it ferment and how strong the yeast is has a direct correlation to the amount of alcohol that's in it when you finally bottle it. So once you get all that water and everything added, that's when you take your hydrometer reading and you record it. Now this batch, before we add yeast or anything, our hydrometer reading is 1.085. So after the hydrometer reading, you have a flask or a beaker full of your fresh brew. So we're gonna take that, because remember, you've already sterilized the hydrometer and you've sterilized the beaker, so your brew is, for all intents and purposes, sterile as well. So we're gonna pour that brew into another sterile container like a mason jar, and we're going to add our yeast to that. Allow that yeast to hydrate and start foaming up and doing what it does. So when it starts to foam a little, then you know your yeast is alive and you're not wasting effort by pouring dead yeast into your batch. And now that you have your yeast hydrated, your batch is in the primary fermenter, it's elevated to the proper level, and you're ready to go, you pitch the yeast, which is the term that we use for pouring the live yeast into our batch to initiate the fermentation cycle, is called pitching the yeast. So you pitch your yeast, and the moment you pitch your yeast, you bless your mead. You let the guys know your intention, that this is for them.
Stand up, guys.
Odin, All-Father, winner of the sacred mead, make that purpose clear. Bless it. Ask Odin to bless this batch, to bless your efforts, because those efforts ultimately exist to build frith and to pay honor to the gods and the ancestors. And now, while you might not want to do this at the very beginning, I find it very, very cool to keep track of every batch of mead that I make. It's very simple. I record what is my recipe. I just record the dates of anything I'm doing, whether I'm racking it or adding an adjunct or removing an adjunct or anything like that. I just keep a really simple logbook of everything I do, so in time I can duplicate it. Now, keep in mind, you can follow the exact same recipe with the exact same materials and the meads will turn out different every single time. I've never had 2 batches come out exactly the same, but that's part of the fun of it. But if you have a good batch and you rebrew it, it's going to be good, just a little different. And sometimes you'll be ready to bottle a batch and it is not that good. So what I say is either leave it in the fermenter, leave it alone, push it off the side in the dark corner somewhere where you never have to look at it again, and then come back to it and try it out in a year or 2. Barring the capability to do that, bottle it and then stash it away. Put it in a storage unit, put it under the house, put it in the barn, whatever you have to do, and then come back to it in a year and sample a bottle, come back to it in a year and sample a bottle. I've had a couple of bad batches in my whole brewing career, and every one that I've just left alone and forgot about for 2 or 3 or 4 years and go back to it, it turns out amazing after it's had time to mellow and settle. So never throw away a bad batch of mead. Put it off to the side. Unless you get a vinegar infection, that's not going to go away. Put it on your salad, enjoy your mead vinegar. And on that note, keep an eye on your fermentation too. So there'll be a point where the fermentation just rockets and it's bomber and the stuff's foaming and it looks crazy. And then after a while, it just kind of dies down, and then you're lucky to get 2 bubbles a day out of your fermenter. So at this point, when your fermentation dies off, you may need to rack it to a new container. Now, once you've got it racked into a new container, You can do that as often as you need to. Usually about 3 weeks into it is when it starts to settle. You'll see a big chunk of sediment starting to appear on the bottom. That's when you rack it into a new container. And then as you watch it throughout the periods while you're waiting for it to do its thing, it'll slowly, every once in a while, you'll start seeing a buildup of sediment in the bottom. Whenever you're uneasy about it, clean, sterilize, and rack it into a new container. And you can, so 2.5 gallon containers will keep you in mead for a long, long time. In my case, I have 3 8-gallon conical fermenters on the wall because I have to brew for an entire kindred, a kindred that offers a lot. We offer a lot of mead to the gods in this kindred. We don't just talk about it. We tend to need at least 2 5-gallon batches every year at a minimum just to sustain our practice. And if we want a little extra, well, we got to brew a little extra. But I'm fortunate in that my kinsmen come with honey, they come with additives, they're willing to pitch in a hand and do the brewing. They're willing to do every part of it because they get to reap the benefit of it, and they want their contribution to be counted as well. It doesn't really count for their contribution if I buy all the ingredients, buy all the honey, do all the work, sterilize all the equipment, bottle all the mead, and then go out there and pour it out to the gods, and they're standing around being like, this isn't my offering. I didn't offer anything of value. All I did was watch you offer something of value. So my kinsmen come, help us brew, and add to the value of the batch in the first place.
This is way better than just doing it ourselves. Ah! What? I'm just saying.
You're damn right.
We're not done yet, but if you found that useful, go ahead and hit that like button, and don't forget to visit our Amazon store for any of the brewing supplies that you need. All right, so now we're gonna go into bottling. Now this mead was on the wall for over a year. I think 13, 14 months is how long it was in the fermenter. Of course, I maintained it through the course of that year by emptying out the yeast and the sediment, but the first thing you have to do is you have to know how many bottles you're gonna need. Now, this is a 750 milliliter bottle. This is a cork one, this is a Gross style. They both hold the same volume. There's a lot of different shapes of bottle, but look at the volume of it. 750 milliliters, I don't know what that equates to, but I know that a case of 12 750 milliliter bottles is enough for a 2.5 gallon batch. So if I'm brewing a 5-gallon batch, I need 2 cases of bottles at 750 milliliters, and I generally have a couple of extra oddball bottles laying around just for the excess, because like I said, I'm starting out with 5.5 gallons. Some of that's gonna get used up through the brewing process and siphoning and the clearing of sediment and all that business. And then eventually I'm gonna come down pretty close to 5 gallons, but sometimes it's a little high. And when it's a little high, I wanna have a bottle to put that in because I don't wanna waste it.
Still didn't fill that bottle.
I feel like we need to drink
We
that
just
bottle.
need to drink this bottle.
I feel like we need to drink that bottle. It's not
Fill the
completely
bottle
full.
up.
That's ours.
Now, once you have all your bottles together, wash them and sterilize them. Even if they're brand new, wash them and sterilize them anyway, or at least sterilize them, soak them in your sterilizer for a while. You're gonna wanna gather all of your bottling equipment. In most cases, all that really equals is your siphoning hose, the same one that you use to transfer from one container to another. You're gonna do the exact same process and transfer it into the bottles. It does get a little messy. We tend to put our bottle in a pot so that when we transfer, anything we spill gets collected in the pot. Of course, my kinsmen are ravenous about it, so they'll drink it right out of the bucket.
This is what we're down to? Drinking out of a bucket?
That's fine, but you just don't want to spill it all over the floor because it does become a big sticky mess. So put your bottle in a bucket, fill it that way. We have a pretty easy system with these conical fermenters. Before you bottle, before you do anything, you siphon off a little bit and you take your second hydrometer reading. Very important if you want to know the alcohol content. And another example of alcohol content, this one right here, 10.5% alcohol by volume. So once you take your hydrometer reading, you don't have to go through and do the math right yet to figure out what the alcohol is. You have your reading, that's all you really need. Now, once you've taken a hydrometer reading, your final gravity, your FG, and record their final gravity reading, you now have a flask or a beaker full of mead. You don't want to pour that back in, but you want to drink that mead. Maybe dry, it may be a little sweet. It all depends on how much your batch fermented, but that's going to give you a good measure to decide how much to back sweeten it if that's the way you like your mead. So now, what do you do with those numbers from the hydrometer reading? Our original gravity, our OG, is 1.085. Now, as sugar is consumed and it becomes alcohol, that gravity is going to go down. So we'll just throw a guess at 1.000. That's a real easy one to look at. That's how your number is going to go. It could come up at 1.010 or anything like that. There's a lot of numbers, but it's going to go down. It will not climb any higher than 1.085. You will not see it come up as 1.090. The only way that can happen is if the sugar is being added to the mix. That is why you want to make sure that you get this final gravity reading before you resweeten your batch. It's very important you do it before you resweeten. That's going to give you your gravity. So my final gravity is going to be 1.000. So I'm going to subtract. What do I get? 0.85 is my total, 0.085. I'm going to multiply that, 0.085, by 131. That's the constant for the conversion between sugar and alcohol. This is 11.135. So we don't need that 5. So 11.14 roughly. I would drop all of that because we're going to add a little bit of water in it. I would just call this an 11 ABV. Alcohol by volume, I would say 11%. It's a little higher than 11, but 11% is a good estimate, especially when I have to add more sugar, add more water to the batch. It might negate that. I tend to try and keep it in my records at 25% increments. So it can be 11.25, 11.5, 11.75, or 12. 25% increments. If it falls a little below, I just wipe it out and don't worry about it. If it's 11.36, I'll probably just call it 11 1/4. Pandemic, Milfendel, Peach Melomel, Raven's Blood, Sin Omen, which is the most epic sign from the gods ever.
Is that the one that had the ravens?
More than ravens, dude. There was probably 10,000 birds flying in a big circle in a spiral above our house.
I remember that. That's a really good mead, too.
Ooh, that was crazy.
If you enjoyed that, go ahead and share this video with your friends and with your groups, because I can't share in the Asatru groups. They have a strict policy against self-promotion, but there's nothing that says that you can't share us. Also, don't forget we have a swag store listed down below. Got some cool t-shirts, coffee cups, and other really neat things. Check that out if you want to support this channel and support this kindred and content like this in the future. May all your sacrifices be accepted by the gods and paid back in turn, because a gift demands a gift. Hail the folk.